arguments against free will are kind of saying things like, oh, well, because we only have free will to act within our nature, and because of things that might affect our decisions and like different consequences and things, our actions are totally predictable. That doesn't mean we still didn't choose them. Just because someone might say, oh, I bet she'll buy that top, it doesn't mean she didn't choose that top.
Yeah, you can be conditioned to choose something, but that doesn't mean you're not still free to choose it.
I disagree. Like, I think the brain's really predictable, and studies have shown that you actually make a decision like a few seconds before you realise you've made it. And
it might be predictable, that doesn't mean you're not making the decision.
And just because the brain makes the decision a few seconds before you comprehend the decision.
Before your conscious brain knows that your brain makes the decision before you consciously know you're making
your brain.
it.
You've made a decision.
Yeah, but the brain makes it because it's predictable, like it knows what it's going to do.
Even if it's predictable?
It's not predictable, because if it was predictable, everyone would always know what everyone else was going to do.
No, you don't know.
Well, they did an experiment where they got a man and they had to tell him to predict whether he was going to pick like heads or tails. They said, oh, change your mind a load of times before you actually arrive on the right decision. And the scientist picked like 20 times out of 20 the one that the man was going to pick before he'd even sort of consciously made up his own decision.
Look at Derren Brown though. He essentially uses mind control by implanting things into your mind, but that doesn't mean that you aren't still free to make that choice. Even if there's stimulus in your mind that's suggesting you're going to make that choice, you can still choose. You are still choosing, even if it's a stimulated, forced upon you choice, but it is still a choice.
Well, I think that free will doesn't exist, but because what we may think of as free will isn't free will, because, as you say, if it's the brain that's determining things already, then you may say we still have free will, but that's not free will as in classically we can do whatever we want, because the brain chooses, even if it's just randomly, the brain chooses what we're going to do, but we don't have control over it necessarily.
So if we haven't got any free will, does that mean whatever path I'm following, that's already been written? So if I do something bad, that's already been written. So why would God write a bad path for me?
That's why religious people always stick to free will, because it's one of the key sort of theodicies to explain why God allows evil, that we create it ourselves because we can do what we want.
If Jesus chooses who is to be the prophet, or God chooses, I think God is being unfair because he's selectively choosing certain people to be the prophet, where God should treat everyone equally instead of deciding on who gets what or who doesn't.
Just because God knows outside of time that you might make that choice, it doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't made the choice.
It's like two different things. It's like you're watching a film and what's actually happening in that film is completely set out. There's nothing you can do about it. But to you watching it, the character can make any choice that could happen.
So you're saying we're like the people in the film? It's already set out?
It's just an analogy. It wasn't that deep.
Miracles are so infrequent that, yes, maybe science could say, oh yeah, there's 1 in a billion chance, but miracles are so improbable that I don't think that they can happen. It's usually just miscommunication or a different interpretation that caused a miracle rather than something ridiculous actually happening.
If I was myself back in the day and there was nothing to control anyone, because well and truly, if you think about it, humans like to control other humans and let people do stuff for them. So I would think, how would I get someone to do something for me? I'll show them a trick. Let me make someone blind that's not blind. AKA, get my friend to come in and say, oh, I can't see. You're healed. I'm healed. Miracle performed.
Conversation killer.
Lucy, you said that you mentioned claims for miracles today. Does anybody have any experience of knowing someone who claims a cure from what was diagnosed as being an incurable disease?
There was a young boy who was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and after prayer at a church, he was supposedly healed. And we kind of know the family. It's kind of a story that I've heard quite closely. We know he's healed. We know he was diagnosed, kind of thing. And it's not really nobody could say how that happened.
It could be misdiagnosed because science isn't infallible. Science doesn't say we always have all of the answers, and sometimes doctors do get things wrong.
But could you not say that a miracle is not even necessarily a theological thing? But if you just take the word and like get rid of all the meanings that people have put to it and just put it as a word for something that changes for no real reason and it shouldn't have changed, could you not use that word maybe for both science and religion and sort of combine the two to find an understanding?
Well, yes, but the problem is that miracle does have religious connotations.
Okay, so say we make up a new word that could encompass all the things that go wrong for any number of reasons. Would that not be a better way to explain these things than like a religious way or a scientific way?
Like a blip?
Yeah.
Or a freak occurrence?
Yeah, like that.
But then I think that would strip away any sort of... you're right, it would get rid of any sort of religious connotations, but then there's no point talking about them in these kind of debates, if there aren't any.
That's true.
I still think there is conflict between the two, because science on the whole, normally, if it's done properly, I think, will tend to look at facts from an objective viewpoint, whereas religion already has some sort of bias and will often try and impose certain morals and ethical principles upon the type of facts that you're observing. And you can see conflict at the moment. You'll see scientists will be studying stem cell research, embryos, and you'll often see many Christians or other theists condemning it and smashing up laboratories and stuff, whereas you wouldn't necessarily see scientists going to mosques or churches or synagogues and destroying those.
I think there is confrontation, but there needn't be. I think the integration approach should be what happens, but I think due to a lack of understanding on both sides of entirely of the other side's viewpoint, you do lead to the confrontation.
I think like interaction would definitely be good, like a much better approach to take, because they are both thinking about similar issues, maybe in separate ways and coming to separate conclusions, but they do both have things to offer each other.
I think there's always going to be conflict just because of this sort of empirical evidence that science always focuses on, and then this gap of faith in religion. And I don't think scientists will really ever understand completely like how believers can accept something when they've just got like blind faith.
Also, scientists want to become a sort of God with stem cell research, etc., etc. I think where they can't prove there's a God or disprove him, they might as well, I think they're thinking maybe we might as well be God and show them that we can be our own gods if we want to.
To what extent do people like Richard Dawkins raise science to be their religion? Does he sound like a preacher at times?
I think it depends.
Compromise.
I think it depends how you define the term religion, kind of thing. I think that there are a lot of people who make science their religion in that they exercise faith within science. They preach what they think is to be true.
You could argue that scientists have actually assigned the classical attributes of God to science to some extent, because omnipotence, they're saying that science does have the power and the power to create the world and the universe.
I disagree, because when a scientist like makes a theory, they have to like go through it so many times, they have to prove it, and then they're constantly being like changed. But like religion, they're just stuck in their ways.
Science doesn't come to particular facts or observations with an agenda already laid out, saying these are my main principles, I need to make everything fit into this. Whereas religion...
That's what exactly it does do. People come up with a hypothesis and then try to find the evidence to support it.
But they're willing to change that.
But they're willing to change that.
Not all scientists.
Yeah,
There's been several scientists.
Constantly moving forward, whereas religion always falls back to the same. This is the Bible, this is our beliefs. Always falls back to that.
Religion has already predetermined all the ethical principles that it's going to go about.